pretty much my whole career. Even in college, I was an intern in a hospital. And early on in my career, I was a social worker in a skilled nursing facility, a fancy term for a nursing home. And as a social worker, especially a young one, I was a pretty opinionated person. I had very strong beliefs on death with dignity, living wills, DNRs, anyone over a certain age, they should really have a DNR. And it was really like a black and white kind of scenario. And what I've learned over my career is that every time I personally have some sort of experience in healthcare that's a bit more on the extreme side, it makes me question most of the beliefs that I've built throughout my career. So that one, as far as advanced directives, came into question when I was in my mid-20s, and my husband's grandmother, who is my living hero, she was 96 years old and still leading water aerobics every morning and running poker club, and was just the most fun, energetic woman you've ever met. And one day she just started becoming very nauseous and was not able to keep food down anymore. And we had her in the hospital, and the surgeon comes in and it's just like, well, you're not going to eat anymore. And we were all just kind of like, what? And even though she's 96 years old, and all of the things that I had seen and experienced as a social worker would lend to a completely different thought process, at that time, it was like, well, what do we, she's just not going to eat, and it was kind of at this impasse where it really made me start to question how we talk about things, how things are handled. Now in my current career, I know how that conversation could have gone a whole lot better and would have had a much better outcome for her. I mean, either way, she would have passed away, but that process and that journey of getting there could have been so much smoother and more comfortable for her and the rest of my family. We really didn't have time to prepare for that. I had another similar impasse with my father-in-law after he had a massive heart attack. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. The bus is here. Okay. So my father-in-law was chronically ill for many years, had 12 physicians at one point in time. And in the last year of his life, he was diagnosed with end-stage renal failure. He had congestive heart failure. I mean, he was in doctor's offices every week, but none of the physicians were really telling him and my mother-in-law what that meant. They would tell them that he was stable. And after one episode of having shortness of breath, the family was told by an interventional cardiologist that he had like a year to live, and he's basically a ticking time bomb because he had several risks for heart attack. And they could treat that, but why would they do that with all of his other ailments, was the quote that came from the physician. And at the time, it was just this really stunned point of, wow, we really don't let people know how sick our loved ones really are and what these implications really mean. Because when I talked to my mother-in-law about hospice, she was shocked. It never crossed her mind that we were really at that imminent state. It was just, but they've been saying he's stable. So it's at these impasses over and over again. I end up questioning the things that I have set in stone as fact and how we should handle things. I've had to question these, and I've also had to really rethink on how we communicate and how we lead families through these journeys.
Hello, this is Gina
and Don
with Focused Healthy Family. This is podcast number 44. And today we are talking with Leah Maul about her experience working with the senior population, as well as her personal story being a member of the sandwich generation. But before we get into that, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Today's podcast is sponsored by Q Sciences. Don and I discovered that the supplements we were taking and giving to our children were not being absorbed properly. I was very excited when I found Q Sciences. I was impressed with the quality of the products and that they provide maximum absorption. They have a variety of products, including a Q Max product, which is a combination of 3 products, including vitamins, minerals, and a probiotic. They also have hemp oil, a vitamin B12 spray, a sleep spray, and kids products. I've really seen a difference in how these products are improving how I feel, improving my mental health, and I'm happy with the quality of these products and how they're helping our whole family. If you'd like to learn more,
simply go to qsciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com, and find out more information there.
and stop throwing your money away on supplements that don't work and use a quality product like Q Sciences. We're back, and in today's podcast, we're talking with Leah Maul. Leah's here to share her personal experience being in the sandwich generation, taking care of her aging aunt while raising her children. Leah has worked in healthcare for over 20 years and always working to improve the lives of seniors and their families. When Leah's not currently busy with her Caring Seasons health business, you can find Leah at baseball fields, cheering on her boys and playing with her daughter. Her family enjoys camping, hosting family and friends for cookouts, and spoiling their 3 dogs, Lulu, Piper, and Charlie. Welcome, Leah. I'm so glad you're here to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I was kind of curious, you said with the story you told, it was a interesting story, is how, in that situation, the first scenario where you're talking about your grandmother and she couldn't eat. I'm just curious as to your thinking now. How would that have played out for you if you had done it the way you believe in now? I guess is.
Yeah, like if you could go back and change.
Yeah, what would it look like now for you?
Well, in that scenario, I would have known that hospice would have definitely been a benefit to all of us, and that the surgeon, it was basically the way he presented it. It was surgery or go home and starve, and that just sounded so awful and bleak, something to put her through. Now knowing all of the different palliative treatments that professionals can do to help ease that transition, it could have been so much easier. And she ended up having surgery, and it was awful, and she was never recovered and was in more pain than I believe she ever would have been the other way.
Right. Right. Yeah. And how long ago was that roughly? I'm just curious.
That was 11 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. So palliative and hospice care was around 11 years ago. And yet, yeah, the way the doctor presented it, it's, I can only imagine how challenging that is, because I work in, geriatrics in a nursing home as an occupational therapist. And someone who's that healthy at 96, you don't just give up on living, right? So like that makes sense why she had the surgery. What do you mean? I can't eat anymore. And yet to go through that kind of surgery at her age and everything, I imagine it was very complex, that there weren't other options, like you said, it's such a.
Well, I always tell the story. I had a great aunt, my Aunt Zita, German, and she was 96, and she used to joke. She didn't joke. She actually did. She goes, I go down to the nursing home to help with the old people, but it was nice. I guess a really good way. She passed in her sleep very peacefully, so she luckily didn't have to go through that. But she was kind of my hero too. She used to come to our house, and she was such a energy being, just out there and so neat to be around. So anyway, that's just a little story.
No, it's a great story. It's really, she made me rethink what aging could be. Mm-hmm. And she was, Vera was very similar to your aunt, where she would volunteer at the nursing home that her husband was in. He had advanced Alzheimer's, and she would go and volunteer there all the time. And she was significantly older than most people around her and generally more healthy. and helping them. And so it was really a shock because it truly came overnight, the change. And and like you said, it really is a disservice that we sometimes do. I don't think that hospice and palliative care is utilized far enough. And if it is utilized, it's generally not utilized soon enough. And I felt that way well prior to moving into the hospice industry. It's just something that I'm hoping that with the baby boomers aging, it becomes something that becomes more readily available and more expected as with their generation really expecting more.
Yeah. And I'm seeing that. I've worked in nursing homes I've been in healthcare for 30 years. So, and in nursing homes for most of that time, I guess I'm seeing overall, just for my, general perspective, that, I read people come from the hospital to us that palliative care is often mentioned. Hospice care is mentioned from the beginning, even before they're at those stages. So I feel like I'm seeing it a lot more than I used to see it. So I'm hopeful, but yet, you had that experience, and surgeons are different in how they approach people versus, the whole team of things. And that's one thing with Don. It was in the hospital with a heart attack 11, 12 years ago. And each department was great, but the communication between them was what I saw was a real problem. And so kind of when you're speaking about that, the surgeon says this, but what's the whole, what's the whole perspective for the whole person? Because he's looking at one body part and this is what we can fix or not fix.
Well, when my mom was in the hospital, she too had a heart attack, and she was moved between so many rooms. I think we counted 5 rooms, if I remember right, which didn't help her. She had some dementia going on, but that didn't help it at all. I mean, it made it much worse because she was so confused as to where she was, and also
there's so many different factors at play here.
Right. And that's some of those pieces that, having worked in healthcare, those are the aspects of caregiving that come natural, that I can talk to like very easily, but they're not necessarily like things that the things that really trip me up as a caregiver. Like I would, communicating between physicians was something from my career that I'm really comfortable with, and I don't have any qualms about speaking with physicians very directly and asking questions. I know that's very hard for some individuals. I understand a lot of the factors that make dementia so much harder, and changing locations is like one of the big things that could really turn their day upside down. For me, it was a lot more of the emotional day-to-day things that were a bit harder to manage than these like bigger overarching things that may and do give other families without the healthcare experience a really hard time in trying to navigate that.
Sure.
And
I'm curious on that note, talking about, you're very comfortable talking to physicians and doctors because you did that as a social work and in your other roles. Did you find it felt different when you were talking to them, not as a professional, but as a family member? Did you have, your experience?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it kind of depended on where I was in geography. It's usually, and for the case of Vera, when she was, the very first thing that surgeon said is, "Are you a doctor?" That was the very first response when I asked, like, what is the course of treatment? Like, what are your plans here? What are our options? And that was his first reaction. And I still don't understand what that has to do with anything at all. And later in my career, I worked for a very large health system and was pretty well known in the medical community. So whenever I was in a physician's office, I was talked to like I was a doctor a lot of the time. So then I had to make them kind of bring it down to my level as to what they were talking about, or they were talking shop and they wanted to talk work. So it was, or complain about work is more like it. And that piece was always a little different on how to handle it. But and now, and when dealing with my aunt in particular, I do not tell them I have any healthcare experience at all. I feel like I get a whole lot more details and context as to what's going on, and it's just gone better for me in the long run.
Well, they probably don't talk in the doctor lingo that you might not understand. I mean, you probably understand some of it, but they may go higher than you even imagine, and using the letters and all that kind, that. So yeah, going without being known that you know what you're doing, that probably helps you to get it explained in a more common or basic level.
Yes, it's true, Don. I mean, I understand a lot of the medical jargon, but when you start talking lab values, that doesn't mean anything to me. And that's the kind of things that will happen along the way.
Right.
But I've learned to become like pretty assertive, especially with my aunt and how we work with the physicians. I pretty much tell them everything that I'm looking for and what I need right from the start. And it really helps to kind of gauge where we're going. I said, we are dealing with dementia here. We are dealing with this. These are the things that I know is going on. This is what, and she also has a very limited medical history. She didn't take care of herself. So we don't have a whole lot to go back to in history. So, just being really direct with what the facts are that I know have really helped in guiding those conversations along. And they're really busy. So I think they really appreciate that.
I'm sure. Yeah, the
directness. That directness.
And the fact that you have that background helps you to know the right questions to ask. And
yes. Yeah, I definitely have a leg up on a lot. Yeah.
Well, I was kind of, so let's kind of into, this is part of our Sandwich Generation series.
Right.
And so we're talking about parents that are sandwiched in between raising their kids and taking care of elderly or aging parent. In this situation, it's a loved one that you're taking care of. I was, how did you prep for that? How did you have to explore, getting ready to know all the things about your aunt, to the facts, as you said, to the doctors? How did you come about with that? I guess we've known her for a while, but did you have to do a lot of searching and gathering to get all the information together to be prepared to talk to the doctor?
I did, and mostly it was knowing that I was going to need to relocate her from Florida to North Carolina, and that she was going to need to go to assisted living for dementia. I already knew that there were things that North Carolina requires that I have in place for her to be placed in an assisted living. So I had my guideposts as to what I needed, and it was kind of backwards than everyone else, where I had to get her into doctor's offices so I could actually have the data to complete those necessary forms and those tests to say that she's cleared to go in. It was my big hiccup was the moving her here and changing things, because it really happened suddenly. Her husband passed away of a heart attack, and we were having to go down there that day to go, because she was not safe to be alone by herself. And so then it was a matter of, my kids are home and in school, and I need to get her things, get her here while we try to wrap our heads around everything that we need to do. And figure out finances. It was a lot of that piece of trying to figure out what their life was. And I kind of had a guess as to what I was going to be stepping into, but I wasn't entirely sure. So it was a lot of that, trying to put that puzzle together, without her being a credible person to give me that information.
So were you already her power of attorney? I'm curious kind of how that fell into your lap, or.
It kind of happened. over the last year prior, her husband's health, we didn't see them very often. And then COVID made it so that we didn't see them at all for a couple of years. And his health declined rapidly. And he had a heart attack about 6 months prior. So when that happened, my mother-in-law initially went down to take care of her sister, my Aunt Gail, so that she wasn't alone while her husband was in the hospital. And in that, she ended up becoming so stressed. I've never seen caregiver burnout happen so quickly. But in the course of 2 weeks, I had to fly down and like rescue my mother-in-law, essentially. And it was in seeing that situation that I was like, okay, we need to figure this out. And they didn't have children. And Gail and I always had a close relationship. She was a nurse in nursing homes her whole career. And we had a lot of long conversations about life and what we want and, philosophies and just work angst conversations over the years. And it was kind of this like understood thing that I'm going to take care of them kind of scenario. So we didn't do paperwork until he was ill. And I'm glad we did it when we did.
Yeah. Because it gets more complicated after the fact. So
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure they were very happy to have you and your mom, especially because taking care of a sister that has its own, just seeing, her health and what she's going through. And it's great that you were able to go down there. But I imagine, the tricky part is, how old are your kids, Leah? We didn't ask that.
They're young. So I have a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and an 8-year-old.
Okay.
Young and busy.
Yeah.
Busy crew. Yes.
And so having to all of a sudden drive to Florida from North Carolina or if you're in South Carolina, and to figure out what you're going to do with the kids. I mean, that adds the complicating factor of why we call it the sandwich generation.
Well,
it really does take a village, I can't do it without, my parents are here. They moved to the Charlotte area. My neighbor and I are constantly helping each other out with our children. They're the same age. If it wasn't for them, I'm not really sure what we would have done during that time. And of course, my husband made adjustments to his schedule, but it's a lot. It's a lot to figure out.
Yeah.
Well, one of the two of the areas we've talked about really kind of emphasizing on is communication and my mind went. Oh boy, I need to maybe get to nursing center myself. You help me out, communication and
well, I mean, the big thing is like you talked about communication, whether it's communicating
thanks for covering
with the healthcare professionals and the family members, like, your mom needed help and you realized you had to step in, but getting other people to help out, you kind of were all ready to know what to do with things. And so
anxiety and the stress, that's and that's what I do. So I forget that.
It's real. All of that's real. And so when I wasn't asked to come down to Florida. What ended up happening was I was getting less and less communication from her. And then eventually we were on the phone and I can just hear it in her voice, like that never once did she want to burden me. It was actually right at my 40th birthday that all of this was taking place. And she didn't want to drag me down during that time, which I fully appreciate. But at the same time, it was me having to know her and feel like this isn't right. I need to get down there. And then once you get down there, it's a whole lot of stress and anxiety riddled, what are we going to do? Is he going to be able to go home? What are we going to do with that? Trying to figure out all of those pieces. And anything in healthcare, it's a whole lot of hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
So adds to a lot of this, we have to wake up early to get there to talk to the doctor and you just sit there and wait for them. And it just builds into that anxiety that you have. And there was a whole lot of unknown with their finances. And
so that added a whole nother.
It did. And it's not something it's this is one of those do as I say, not as I do kind of moments. And I've worked with my patients and their families on stress and how to manage it and to prevent caregiver burnout. But I'm the first one to break all of my things that I'm supposed to be doing to stop it, and it's, like right out of the gate, my exercise routine gone.
Yeah.
And I'm ordering noodles and and it's like all of these other things that I'm doing to like comfort myself, but they're not the things that are going to like help me make it through the marathon that's going on, but it's so funny that I can teach them and preach them all day long, but I'm the first one to drop it.
Yeah, and it's the reality of what it's really like, right? We can say, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. And, I love how, you noticed that your mom was stressed, but she didn't want to burden you. That is such a big thing. And it's partly, it sounds like your parents are close to my parents' age, just that generation. It can be a generational component. I mean, my mom says it to me. My dad has Parkinson's and he's dealing with dementia that's gotten worse since COVID. And we still have a child at home and have kids with anxiety issues. And she says that to me, I don't want to burden you. She lives 40 minutes. I'm like, Mom, you can always ask me and I can say no if I can't. But it's that mindset of not wanting to dump her problems on me and wanting to just take care of it. And yet, like asking for help, I think, and that's probably something that's a challenge for all generations, is knowing when to ask for help and also letting family help you when they step in and offer to.
That's one of the biggest things. And it's asking for help. For me, it's what am I even asking for is the thing that I struggle with. I've had people ask about my aunt, like, oh, what can I do to help? And I'm like, I don't know. It's I'm like, I don't really know. You can't take her to the doctor for me because I need to have this conversation and trying to figure out some of those things. That's part of it, but really, I'm sure if I actually like sat down and thought about it, I can probably write down some things, maybe you can go visit her so that I don't have to go today. Like that kind of scenario, like that would be something. But my first response is always like, oh, I'm good. Right. I'm good. And
by the time you explain to somebody what to do, it can be easier to do it yourself. And yeah, I think we're kind of ingrained. I don't know if this is across the board, but definitely, I'm not talking into the microphone. Don reminds me. As women, we're supposed to be caregivers and we're supposed to take care of people. And so that asking other people for help is not something we're really taught how to do.
We're not even taught how to be caregivers. Like, let's be real. Yeah. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, as an actual caregiver, it's like, I read the books when I was having my babies.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I did all that prep. I did everything. I don't want to read a book about careggiving.
It's a crash course of jumping in and figuring it out.
It is. It really is. And none of it is instinctual, other than just knowing that person and looking at like the cues and being like, something's off here, and that instinct is like the only thing that I have. The rest of it is all just faking it till you make it. And my goal is like, and I guess this is the one thing that really came out of like the social work background is like, I know she's safe. And that's the number one thing. Like, that's the number one thing we have to worry about. She is safe. Everything else is cake and icing, and I just try to remember that and not put so much pressure on myself for that. But, my husband's not jumping in, like really like asking to help out or anything. I don't think he feels the expectation that he needs to.
Right. And that's sort of our society, it tends to fall on the women or there's a person that's the caregiver person, especially when you have a family member in healthcare. I'm that person for my parents. I happen to live the closest to them, but that's why they moved close to me. Yeah. And so, but like you said, we're kind of thrown in just like we're thrown into parenting.
Yeah.
And you can learn about it, but until it's like people who don't have kids preaching to you about how to be a parent. It's like you don't know until you've been there and you've done that. And
Yeah,
Like,
till you have a few of these gray hairs up here.
Yeah.
occupational therapist, after helping Don through his rehab, he went through cardiac rehab after the heart attack, but then he also had open heart surgery. And there's a whole lot more medical terms that I understand now. And just having been on that side of things, and also being there for my dad who went through back surgeries, I have coworkers who get so annoyed when family members are on top of things and they're asking all these questions and they're like, I just got to get my job done. And it's like, you have no idea, how much of a difference that makes, and how that the family members who are on top of things, those patients are the ones that get the best care, and it makes a difference for their quality of life. And so it gives me that perspective that, and I guess the way the system is set up, it's not set up to do a lot of educating of the family members. And like the communication part is huge. And that's kind of the area, there's a lot of services out there that can help you find assisted livings and the level of care. And what Don and I really want to focus on as we're building this program, where we're going to be working with people and groups, is the communication parts. Talking to your family members, like, okay, I'm the one who's stepping up and doing the primary stuff, yet these are things you can do to help. And sometimes it's about not only what they can do to help, like your aunt, but what they can do to help you,
Right.
taking care of the kids for a weekend, so that, or, not even so you can go see your aunt, but that you can have time off, and there's so many different nuanced ways to help, but it doesn't come to your mind. You're in the middle of it. When you're in the middle of dealing with the situation and dealing with caregiving for either a child or an aging parent or other loved one, you're so in the middle of it that, like you said, when people say, what can I do? You're like, I don't know. You're too busy doing to stop and process all that and think about it.
It's true. I'm nodding along with you throughout that
As I said,
whole process of everything. And I'm definitely that person that comes in with my like checklist of questions, because it's like I have very limited time. Is usually like and I will forget too, because I have so much rattling on in my brain that I need to have this all written down. Every question I want. One of the things that's really helped me in keeping that communication clear, especially with the doctors, is utilizing the portal, like the physician's office portal.
Mm-hmm.
I get really quick responses from her providers, and they are generally very helpful, and it's a much cleaner conversation, and it's easier to go back and look through. And I feel like they remember it more than when we had a conversation at our last appointment 6 months ago. That portal's been a huge help,
because it's right there in writing. You type up the message and they see it, or one of the nurses see it and they communicate back, and you can go back and forth with it. Yeah,
right. And I know I'm fully emailing a nurse. It's probably not actually the doctor. It's probably their nurse, but it works fantastic, and they're very receptive. And I don't know the last time you tried to call a doctor's office, but it's a horrible process. And anything to miss that, I'm willing for it. So the portals have been great. Mm-hmm. And I've started doing it a lot more with the assisted living also. So I'll send the administrator some questions and to the healthcare team there, rather than doing that when I'm there visiting in person. And so when I'm there in person, we're playing Uno and doing things that are a bit more fun. Or now lately, I actually just take her out and bring her home, because even if I still have things to do, she doesn't care, because she's here visiting and she gets to see the kids and the dogs, and I can be in that Zoom meeting I need to be, and I can kind of kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, well, and it's sounding like to me that I think the important thing out of this is to start early. Even if you have to fumble through it, even you don't have to like totally educate yourself, but just get the communication going with your parents. Get it going early. We just talked about talking to her mom and dad, sitting down with them to practice what we're going to hopefully help other people with, but to have a conversation about getting things in line, getting on the portal ahead of time, uh, and getting their know where things are and what they're doing, and just generally getting to know that part. Like I say, you can educate yourself and you can read stuff, but just get started.
Absolutely. Having those conversations are like the most crucial part. I can't imagine having to manage Gail's life right now if her and I weren't so open with each other earlier about
Yeah.
all of our thoughts
Yeah.
and about end of life. Although, everyone else in my family hates the conversation. They don't like that
Yeah.
I talk about it so much and that I'm so free to bring it up. So often, let's say my mother-in-law jokes that I'm just going to let her die. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, no, I follow your wishes. Whatever you want is what I do. And so once I kind of get, it's just because I believe I'm going to take care of myself one way does not mean that I'm going to do the same for you. So whatever your wishes are, let's get that ironed out and understand what that is. So I'm not going off of my thoughts and experiences. So having those conversations really helped and getting that pretty clear going forward. And then in trying to organize finances is another one that's kind of sticky that like a lot of people get kind of complex with. And it's the way I framed it with my family is, I set them up with an estate attorney that I know and trust. And I had them work with him to get all of the pieces in order and to create the log essentially of where everything is. So I know, but I don't personally know their finances at this moment in time, but I know how to access all of it and I can get to everything if I need to. But I haven't gotten into their business, so to speak, but I know that it's well taken care of by a professional that I trust.
Right. And that
it'll be good.
To knowing who to ask and what, what to get help, knowing what questions to ask and what needs to be taken care of. And just knowing where to go. That's what we were talking about with my parents, because my mom takes care of everything. She's, in very good physical and mental health at 79.
Well, we think so anyway.
But you never know when things can happen. And we just need to know some names of, what's even the name of your lawyer. And she's got all these things in place, but we haven't really had the conversation to know that, because if something happened to her, my dad woun't be able to, he might be able to come up with the right name, or he might give us a name of somebody who was their lawyer 20 years ago.
And that's what I was dealing with my aunt. I had paperwork signed, but we didn't do anything, so I found out everything about their banking and whatnot because he saved passwords on his computer. That was the only way I was able to piece together everything. And just kind of collecting their mail and looking at all the places that he had bookmarked in Chrome. And that is how I pieced together their whole financial life and to get everything in order. And I hope and pray that the day comes I need to apply for Medicaid, I have everything that I need.
Yeah.
Well, and starting those uncomfortable conversations, the ones that don't want to talk about it, I think my approach would be a matter of telling them, we want to work with you now while you can make some of these decisions, instead of waiting till I have to make the decisions for you and you can't. So somewhere around there, and doing it in a compassionate way, but just being able to say, I know this is uncomfortable, yet I think it's important we do it now versus when you can tell me the good stuff. You have it all in your, in your mind, versus when you get to a place where you might not be able to say it, you might not be able to get it out of the brain and into paper or onto me, so approaching it that way.
I think that's right, Don. I mean, it's the way I handled it with my mother-in-law in particular. I had to frame it around like a common story. And I talked about her late husband. And I said, what happened to Fred and everything that we went through after his passing, I don't want to go through again. And I don't think, my husband wants to go, none of us want to experience that again. And and this is what I want for me. And I just kind of shared my thoughts, and I was like, have you thought about what you want for you? And she kind of went back and forth, and so from there I said, like, let's set a date. I'll come over and one afternoon and we'll talk about it. And I had brought the 5 Wishes book with me.
Okay.
And where it pretty much helps you outline every part of end of life. It does have a religious slant to it, but it's generally helpful for understanding the conversation, I think. And that's what we did. We went through it after she had a little bit of time to think about it. And then I don't think she realized how many questions it was going to ask, but it was helpful to really start to kind of peel back what she would want in that scenario, because she is not one to share feelings or difficult topics. So that was kind of how I handled it with her. My parents just said, we have all of them, and they're here in this folder. So I just have copies of everything, and they're a little bit more matter of fact.
Yeah, everybody's different with how they deal with it and how you communicate. I want to make sure we covered, you talked a lot about your challenges with helping, your aging aunt, the one that you're, moved up from Florida and found the assisted living for, and that you're the power of attorney for. Are there other things that were kind of some big challenges for you that we didn't touch on?
In regard to caregiving for Gail, no, I mean, those are pretty much the big things. It was more of like a lot of these, like, well, I hope we can get this to work. Like that, mom and sister living together and adult daycare and that kind of scenario, and that didn't work. So then it was like, okay, now we're going to go for assisted living, and it has to work. That's kind of where we are right now. It's not perfect, but it's the best scenario we have at the moment. So it's just in that being flexible.
Right. And so you did try something else first, as far as you said,
transitioning,
living with her sister and going to daycare, adult daycare.
Yes.
Realizing that you can try something, and if it doesn't work, you can make a different choice. And
yes. She only went 3 times, and that was that was it. And it wasn't necessarily the place. It was just such a departure from her usual routine.
Yeah.
And mornings are her bad time, and getting her up to go to daycare is not going to fly. And it just added more stress and anxiety on my mom. So that whole piece, it was not worth it. Even though in the long run, it was going to save her a lot of money.
Right.
And it sounded like a really nice thing. It just did not fit. And it didn't fit with her living at home either. So that there was stressors all the way around, because caring for someone who has dementia is hard and it's tiring. She doesn't wander. She doesn't do any of those things, but being asked the same question over and over again, your response is, your instinctual response is not the right one.
Yeah. Well, it's, I'm talking about, it's like having a toddler, it's kind of like my mom even said, aging backwards, it's as they're losing cognitive ability, that just like a child is gaining it. So you're having to be there all the time. You're having to, and it's very different when someone has been independent and now they're losing the independence. Right. And I like how you said, it didn't work for your aunt, but it didn't work for your mom either. Like, we have to keep those things in mind, that this situation has got to work for all the people who are, that it's affecting, and that something may sound great on paper, but for that person,
right.
If it doesn't work, then it's the quality of life, right? What kind of quality of life is there? Because you said it would have been more cost effective to stay at home and do the adult daycare, but if her quality of life is terrible, then what is the purpose of saving all that money?
Yeah, exactly. And like, let's be real. All scenarios of this are not ideal. There's because what everyone wants is to go back to how they were, right? And we're not going to be there. So no one's going to be happy, like totally happy in any scenario. And especially in my aunt's case, because she went through every change, her whole world turned upside down, and she has dementia. So it was, her husband passed away. She's moved several states away. I mean, everything is just upside down, different. And so it's kind of this, like, I go back to she's safe, she's okay. She's safe, she's okay. She's not going to love every day at the assisted living.
Right.
But maybe some days are more fun than others. And, we bring her out of there often so she gets to see everyone. And it's good enough. It's good.
Her basic needs are being met, like with a baby. They're
She's
fed,
in a very
they're
good
changed,
place.
They're cared for. So their basic needs are being met, and there's compromise that has to happen. So
this is we could talk for a long time on this. I want to
reach out to you again to delve into more specific aspects.
I wanted to give you time to talk just a little bit about your Caring Seasons Health, and just real kind of quickly what it is, and then how can people find out more about it, because it sounds wonderful. It's a hospice and palliative care.
Yes. So we're a brand new hospice starting in York County, South Carolina. Our office is based in Fort Mill. And we're actually a baby hospice of several nonprofit hospices in North Carolina. So we are backed with like over 40 years of experience in hospice care, but we're actually a brand new nonprofit in the area, providing in-home hospice care for our community. And really, the beauty of being a nonprofit in the hospice space is that we really get to build programs that are more patient and family focused. And I don't have to talk to shareholders into why I'm spending this money to do different things. So we're allowed to pay for different things for families. And since I have such a passion around caregiving, that is one of our focuses of our program. So we are just as much involved in the caregiver's life as we are in our patients, is realizing that while, yes, we are going to provide this wonderful team of nurses and social workers and doctors and chaplains and aides that all come to the home and will see you, they're the ones that's there the majority of the time.
Right.
And they're the one there that's doing the heavy lifting. So we are creating a support program around them. And knowing that, especially in today's day with all of the healthcare shortages that we're seeing, the family caregiver is actually the center spoke of the wheel of healthcare. Right. And studies show that a family caregiver actually has a bigger impact than anyone else in someone's health life. So, I mean, they are 40% more likely to not go back into the hospital. They're 30% more likely to take their medications correctly when they have a family caregiver involved. So we understand and appreciate that person and want to make them as successful as possible through probably one of the hardest parts of their life.
Yeah.
Well, Leah, it has been just wonderful talking to you. A lot of great information too.
I could see doing a future podcast with you, delving more into like palliative care and hospice care and just helping people understand their roles there. There's just a lot of great information. We really appreciate you sharing your personal story, because that helps people, to relate to what you've actually had to go through on the personal side of things. So we appreciate your sharing.
Thank you for having me. I'd love to come back.
So that's our podcast for today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We would love to hear from you. Make sure to leave us a comment. If you like what you heard today, you can learn more about our parenting coaching program or join our next workshop. And you can do that by going to focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's focused with an ED, healthyfamily.com. You can also follow us on Facebook at Focused Healthy Family. You can find us on Instagram with Gina at Focused Healthy Family. And in our website, you can find our blog and our podcast links there. And we want to remind you that there's more to come about the sandwich generation in the future here. So stay tuned for that. And remember,
how you speak to your kids today shapes their future and your own.